In this video, we are going to be installing a lower control arm camber kit on my 1964 Mercury Comet. I'm going to flip the camera around, show you what I purchased from Open Tracker Racing, dive underneath the car, show you what it does, and why you might need one on your Mercury Comet, Falcon, Mustang, etc. if you want more camber out of the front end. So what does a camber kit look like? Well, in this case, what it looks like is these four pieces, two per side, the bolts, and then what we'll call the numbered alignment shims. Now what this does is when you install these, and they do have to be welded in, it allows you to position your lower control arm forward or backward to add or decrease camber, which is nice because otherwise you'd have to do it from the upper control arm. It's very easy to add shims, but if you get to a point like on my car where you can't take away enough shims, you're out of adjustment. So you need to adjust the lower control arm. So I'm gonna pull some of these out of the bag and kind of show you here on the bench and then flip around in the car and show you how they would work on the car. This will make more sense in a minute, but let me just show you first outside of the car. So let's imagine for a second that these aren't on my workbench, that they are installed where they go on the car. Now, how this works is you can go ahead and drop one of these in place. Now this number one would locate the bolt, and in that case, your lower control arm in the center of the slot, okay? If we swap it out for a number four, well, look at that. Now it's moved. So if I put a number one and a number four next to each other, you can see that it has moved the position of the bolt and thus the lower control arm inboard or outboard, which would add or decrease camber. We are on the passenger side of the car right now. And normally, this is the mounting bracket, which mounts to the frame, where your lower control arm right here would go into. Now, I've since removed the bolt, but just imagine normally this is slid up into place and it's in one position. So the angle of your spindle, let's say right now, is straight up and down. Let's just call it that. If I go and install this kit, which I'll kind of lay in here and show you, I can slide this forward or back. When I slide this forward or back, it is like I am lengthening or shortening the lower control arm effectively, which is then going to give you camber adjustment. Now the other way to do this, I'll grab the light and point it up there so you can see, is from the upper control arm, but there are limitations. Disregard all that grease, I've got to get it out of there. But if you zoom in behind the upper control arm cross shaft bolts, you see two pairs of shims. And normally how that would work is you would add shims or subtract shims to change the camber, which is all good and dandy if all you need to do is add shims, because up to a point you can continue adding shims. But what if you want to add negative camber and you run out of adjustment, like on the other side of the car? Well, now you've got to look at something else, and that's truly where this kit comes into play, and I'm going to show you how to install it. So what you do with this kit, it is weld in, is you need to place it up here, just like so. And there's different ways to do it. But basically what happens is you need to get this welded into place, the same thing, obviously, on each side. And then you would take a drill and you would drill out this slot, use a grinder, a file, whatever you have. They do recommend using a drill so that you can have a constant radius on each side, and then try to come through, maybe drill a smaller hole. You want to minimize how much you have to file out, but at the end of the day, you're using this template right here that I'm tracing my finger around to remove an equal amount of material up on the mount so that this slotted hole becomes also a slotted hole in there, and that now you can install your lower control arm and slide it forward and back. You ultimately are going to weld on this side and on this side. You don't want to have any weld on the top and bottom, because remember what I showed you on the bench, you do want that piece to be able to slide right in the center here, those shims, right? So you don't want to have any weld sticking over here that would prevent that from laying flat and give you any kind of weird irregularities. So I did go ahead and cut. You may not have to on your vehicle. I did go ahead and cut this and bend this over to give me more access to weld on the other side. I think once I get this welded in, I'm going to do my best to try and bend this back into place and then close up the little notches that I made. Like a total dummy, when I drilled the holes to make those slots, I didn't have my camera on, it wasn't working properly or something. So they're already drilled. I'm going to try and show you kind of on the table roughly what I did, how to make those slots, and give you some tips maybe along the way, and then we'll flip around and show you what it's like kind of when everything's installed. For illustration purposes only, I'm just using these to make the slot because the piece that you saw earlier is already installed. So these are not how these get installed. This is just to kind of give you an idea. You're starting out with a hole and you need to make a slot. Now here's how I recommend that you do it. First of all, when you place where your actual slot is going to go, don't place it in the center. Use an existing edge, right? So basically imagine you had this hole right here and you've got to make the slot. What I like to do is use the existing hole as the edge of the template. That way, each slot on both sides mimics the edge of the existing hole, so these are in the right spot. That's very crucial. Some of the tools you're gonna need. Obviously a drill, but getting in there with a regular drill, even a smaller one, this is like an M18, even my M12 Milwaukee, which is a little smaller, I didn't have enough room. I had to use a right angle drill. In this case, I had a pneumatic one. You know, an electric right angle drill will work, but just the difference here, okay, is huge. Now, the other thing I'll say is step drill bits are super nice. You're only going up to 1/2 inch. So you can run it, you know, your full 1/2 inch size drill bit, but I would recommend either a step drill, okay, or to kind of start small and work your way up. I think that will be helpful for you. And I'll talk more about how I get everything aligned kind of here in a second. But the big thing is drill as many holes as you can. And here's what I mean by that. You could just drill one hole here and then mark where your other hole needs to be. And then imagine you drill another hole over here and you still have the center. That means you're gonna have to use a grinder. Now I've got this small grinder that takes like 3-inch discs. I've also got a larger grinder. The problem is when you use a bigger grinder like that in there, you're gonna wind up cutting so deep that you're gonna slice a line on each side. It just doesn't look pretty. So small grinder works, but the bigger tip I have is drill more holes. So in this case, you can drill one on the right-hand side, one on the left-hand side, and then eyeball the center and do another in the center, and then you'll just have a little bit of material to take out. Then you can use something like this, or if you've got, you know, some other type of pneumatic wheel, you can cut off that middle spot. You are gonna need a file, one way or the other, file, okay? Make sure everything fits, and then if you've got like a rat tail file to use for the sides, that will help too. Okay, we'll flip around, show it installed in the car. Okay, we've got our slot made. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's hard to make this perfect, and that's honestly probably as good as I'm able to get it. You do wanna make sure that you have enough clearance, and you wanna put this one on the other side too. Obviously you have to slot both sides, but you wanna make sure that your bolt slides back and forth in there. I think when I tack it up, I'm going to make sure that both of them are all the way over this way. I'm using this radius as the factory edge basically, because I didn't touch that. And then just lightly tack it, and then I'm gonna make sure the bolt slides back and forth, but more importantly, I wanna make sure that when I put the spacers in there, these little guys, that I can still line the bolt up all the way through. Okay, now it's just tacked in place, but I went ahead and I checked every single one of the 5 spacers to make sure that they fit, because what you don't wanna have happen is have one of these offset from the other one. So yeah, the bolt slides back and forth, but you'll never get your spacers in. So you really need to kind of double check. And the way that I did that, like I said, was I used the corner of this hole and pushed the bolt all the way up till it's touching, and then pushed the spacer part, or the bracket, whatever you want to call it, back this way until they were snug. Held that in place and just did a couple light tacks, then came back and checked it. Now that's good. I ran the bolt through and I snugged it up just a little bit. You don't want to snug it too much because you don't have your control arm in there, so you'll just crush this bracket. So just snug enough that things won't move, and then we'll go and weld each side. Okay, just to show you how it's welded in, I did it a little bit differently on this other side. And basically, I did not cut the edges here and fold it over, okay? I got it very close, I scuffed everything up, and I welded it into place. I know it looks like there's room because my hand's in here. It's actually really hard to get in here and do this. If you had a lift or something, or you were able to take these brackets completely off the car, you could really make this look nice, but it's functional. Make sure when you're doing it, you don't put too much heat in, you gotta be careful. You put too much heat, you'll wind up welding these little brackets here into place. I keep checking them to make sure they move freely. I'll show you the other side real fast. If the light doesn't blind us, I may have to move it. Yeah, so that one's tacked into place too. Not the prettiest, but you know, honestly, the way these brackets are and everything, I think this is stronger than the original way of just a through hole through here. You've got a lot more meat now holding this in place. Like I said, not pretty. Somebody who's a better welder than me can probably make this look better, but I think it's gonna work. I may have to take a file because I test fit all of the pieces to make sure I have all the adjustments. And what I noticed was, because you can flip these around, so you actually get like 9 different or 10 different adjustment locations, 9 I think actually. But on the 5th location, which would be the most camber, most negative camber on this side, I couldn't get the bolt in the other side. So I got to do a little bit of filing, not on this, but on the inside of the hole, just to make sure everything lines up. Now I've got it all filed away. You can put number 5 in there, slide the bolt through, and everything fits perfectly. So, just so you know, if your holes aren't perfect, like if your slot, like you can see where my finger is, there's like a little lip there still. I might file it a little bit more, but I did check each and every one fits in every single location. So you get 9 camber adjustments. Got my jack underneath there. Got everything sort of back in place roughly where it needs to go. The nice thing about this method with the jack, and you see I'm not putting it on the Zerk fitting, but when I raise and lower the jack, once I have it in that slot, it'll actually kind of move left and right to line up perfectly with my shims. I think I'm gonna go with a 3 shim to start, which is pretty aggressive. I think Open Tracker recommends you start with a 1, but I want about minus 1.5 or so degrees of negative camber. So we're gonna try a 3, and hopefully that moves us over far enough to get the camber we want. If not, it looks like it's not gonna be all that difficult to swap these out. So we'll put these in at 3 and see where it gets us. And then make sure, you know, 3, it depends on which way you orient it, right? So you wanna orient it the way that, in my case, pushes it far enough this way to elongate that lower control arm so that I have the most amount of camber. And I still have 2 more settings if this doesn't get me where I need to be. So we got it in there on setting 3. Some tips I'll give you is, you know, use a jack to get it up in place, and then actually just cycling the steering left and right. If you get one side in and the bolt's a little cocked, just move your steering around and it'll help center it out. I also used a little pry bar here and just pried very gently on the bolt to get it straight, and this dropped down in place. We've got the washers on each side. We're not gonna tighten it all the way yet, because ideally you wanna torque this stuff when it's kind of at, you know, ride height, but we are gonna tighten it enough that nothing comes loose and we can move over to the other side. Well, the good news is I added a lot of camber. The bad news is I added too much. I've got about 2.5 degrees of camber on that side and 3 degrees on this side. So I'm gonna have to lift it back up, swap out that number 3. I think I'm gonna go with a number 1 on this side, a number 2 on that side, and see if that gets me closer to 1.5, and then let the alignment shop figure it out from there. Pro tip though, when you change your camber that much, like remember I was at positive 0.5 degree, now I'm at negative 3 degrees, that drastically changes your toe. So, you know, I went and made some modifications to my, actually cut previously, my Bear, they call it the Bear Tracker. It's a bump steer kit, and I cut 1 inch out of those turnbuckles, whatever you want to call them, when I had the wrong camber. Now that I've dialed in my camber more, I was worried I took out too much. So just probably want to wait, get your camber done first before you do your toe adjustments. We're gonna jack it back up, swap it, see if I can get this better, and then I'll adjust the toe, and then tomorrow we'll take it to the alignment shop. Okay, some final thoughts on this kit. Basically a couple shots of it installed, what the car looks like. It looks so much meaner now that I've got a proper alignment, the car is properly lowered, and I took it out for a drive after just doing a rough alignment. I could not help myself. I'm taking it to the alignment shop tomorrow, but I just had to take it out and drive it. And honestly, it totally rips. Like, I was blown away how much all these parts from Open Tracker Racing really made a huge improvement in how this car handles, especially as the speed increases. I mean, it's easier to steer at low speeds for sure. There's no rubbing or anything like that. But when you get up to speed and throw this car into a corner, it actually hooks and books. Like I said, I'm blown away. I can't wait to actually go out and really drive it. Now I need to address the rear suspension, but tomorrow morning we're going to take it to the alignment shop and get it actually dialed in, because I got it as close as I could with strings, but you can only get it so good. So the next video, you'll get to see how it actually handles when everything is dialed in, and then we'll talk a little bit about the rear suspension, because I'm already noticing some things that I need to fix. That's going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys, and see you next time on Truck and Roll.